Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust the week's gone well, and my, don't they just fly by. Just to remind you of the YouTube footage of Dr. Titus Naikuni's main speak, which was really very, very good. It's kind of had this Maasai philosophy about life, which I really liked. And his first, the job he really wanted was with the Lake Magadi soda. And it's really an interesting story how he sort of kept putting himself in the frame and eventually got the job that he wanted. And that's really a very beautiful part of the world. I'll also put up a photograph of the Boeing 777 extended range, which I learned costs $321 million. And Kenya are purchasing a whole bunch of new planes, including a number of Dreamliners. I would like to thank His Excellency, the Ambassador for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to Kenya for dinner in excellent company last night. He really is quite an amusing fellow. My macro thoughts turn to comments that I saw by the Indian Central Bank Governor Rajan, who warned of a breakdown in global policy coordination. International monetary cooperation has broken down, he said yesterday in an interview in Mumbai, noting how emerging markets helped pull the global economy out of crisis that starting in late 2008. Industrial countries have to play a part in restoring that, and they can't at this point wash their hands off and say, we'll do what we need to and you do the adjustment. We need better cooperation, and unfortunately it's not been forthcoming so far. And I think the emerging market countries are under huge pressure. And we're in that moment when we might have been fated last week, but the market's just taking no prisoners. The rupee is down 15% against the dollar in the past year, but bear in mind it's had quite a good rebound since, in fact, he came in, strengthened 9.6% from a record low reached on August 28th. My home thoughts return. I've uploaded the interview I did with MG Vassanji of the Norfolk, and do tell me what you think of it, because I really enjoy his writing. I've read all his books except two. And of course, we have a similar background. We come from the same community, and I suppose that East African experience for a narrow bunch of folks has made it, very rich for me when I'm reading it. He said many things, and one of the things I liked that he said at Michael Joseph Center was history gives you a sense of the complexity of who you are. And on that note, I went back to the fact that I had a boss once in the early 1990s called Mark Dearlove, which is a wonderful name. If he hit a trading sweet spot, he would not change his clothes and would try and replicate the day again and again. I remember asking him, Mark, what about your underpants? And he said to me, Ali Khan, the sweet spot is not to be trifled with. Walk in the same direction, you do absolutely everything. And besides having a complete and intuitive faith in Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours rule, because nothing comes without putting your mind and the hours into it, I do believe there is a sweet spot in our lives, and that just occasionally we find it. I found it at CSFB many years ago. And yesterday, as I sat presenting my thoughts to the board of Old Mutual and the rather legendary Zoe Cruz, who sits on that board, and she was asking me a point. I'll put up a link to the Wikipedia description of her and another thumbnail I found about her. Of course, she was a very big cheese at Morgan Stanley, and a lot of the folks that I worked with at Credit Suisse were at Morgan Stanley and came to Credit Suisse. And my mind flew back to a time when the Mexican crisis was in full swing, and I walked into Mr. Hatimski's office. Teso Bona crisis was raging. Everyone, Mexico had gone to the war. And I said to Mr. Hatimski, the US cannot afford to let Mexico go. And he agreed with me, and within a minute put Mr. Mulford and Mr. Diamond on the phone, and about 3 minutes later, Credit Suisse had bought up all the Tesla burners in the market and made a huge amount of money. And in that half hour, I had inflected my curve, and it was Zoe actually sitting in front of her talking to her that triggered those memories. And the point is that I can smell my sweet spot again, and it's as sweet a fragrance as that discontinued Guerlain perfume I like, which I can only find in Harrods, or as sweet as the fragrance I smell occasionally and momentarily when I'm driving through Gigiri in the early evening hours. And I keep saying to Nishat when I smell it, what's that perfume? And so far I've resisted jumping out of the car and following the fragrance like my golden retriever Saharan might, or as I once did on the London Tube. But then I was single and the lady in question was extremely attractive. I'd like to put up, I was thinking of Vassanji and Galdessa, which really was a wonderful place. It had this 2 beds, 1 bed you sat in front of your tent. And I'll put up a photograph of it, and there was actually another sofa on the rooftop, and where you had this wonderful view at night. The stars were so wonderfully close. And on that bed that I'm putting the photograph up of, you could watch the elephants crossing the Galana River. And one day we met these elephants on our way back to the lodge, and we just spent about 30 minutes with them, and then they subsequently crossed the river and we were sitting in our tent. I'll put up a photograph later. And finally I'll put up a photograph of the sunset at Lugard Falls in the Savo. Political reflections. Heads of state and government are meeting at a summit organised by the African Union in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. I'll put up a photograph of the AU chairperson handing over ceremony. Outgoing was Haile Mariam Desalegn of Ethiopia, and incoming was Abdel Aziz of Mauritania. And then I liked the speech given by Dlamini Zuma, whose speech was written as a message to a hypothetical friend in 2063, and spoke of a grand reality where a new confederation of African states has replaced the AU. At the beginning of the 21st century, we used to get irritated with foreigners when they treated Africa as one country, as if it were not a continent of over 1 billion people and 55 sovereign states. But the advancing global trend towards regional shocks reminded us that integration and unity is the only way for Africa to leverage its competitive advantage. She said, we did not realize our power, but instead relied on donors that we euphemistically called partners. She spoke of a future Africa with regional manufacturing hubs in the DRC, Angola and Zambia, as well as Silicon Valleys in Rwanda, Egypt, Nigeria and Kenya, and of equal access for women to education and business ownership. The future Africa, Dlamini Zuma said, was also a leader in renewable energy, with war a thing of the past. We lit up Africa, the formerly dark continent, using hydro, solar, wind, geothermal energy, in addition to fossil fuels, she told delegates at the summit in Addis Ababa. She described Kinshasa as having eclipsed Paris and Milan as fashion capital of the world, and Accra is upstaging Brussels as the home of gourmet chocolate. And I did write that piece that the future's not seen in the rearview mirror, and indeed, let's hope that some of the things that she's mentioning come to pass. Interesting piece in the Asia Times about Shinzo Abe, saying he leads the contain China two-step. There's always been an implicit contradiction between Shinzo Abe's declared desire to bring Japan back and the US wish to lead free Asia, The divergence of aims has been obscured by the eagerness of the US defense establishment to encourage Japan's increasing heft as a security defense active pacifist, well, let's just say military power, in order to add to the credibility of US hegemony in the Western Pacific, and Japan's awareness that US military backing, if properly exploited by invoking the US-Japan Security Treaty, can give Japan a significant leg up in its confrontation with the PRC. However, there are signs that there are tensions in the US-Japan romance, largely because the Obama administration is serious about exploiting the potential of its honest broker role to carve out a role for itself as the even-handed interlocutor between Japan and China, a role that the PRC is encouraging in order to drive a wedge between Tokyo and Washington, and is therefore not giving Prime Minister Shinzo Abe the full-throated support that he believes he needs and deserves. Talking about the fact that having met with the US, Abe then jetted off to India, where he served as the guest of honor. And Japan and India, in this article, natural allies strategically located on opposite flanks of the continent, have a pivotal role to play in ensuring a regional power equilibrium and safeguarding vital sea lanes in the wider Indo-Pacific region. An essential hub for global trade and energy supply, logic for strategic collaboration is no less compelling if China, India, and Japan constitute Asia's scalene triangle, with China representing the longest side A, India side B, and Japan side C. The sum of B and C will always be greater than A. It is thus little surprise that Japan and India are seeking to add strategic bulk to their quickly deepening relationship. And the earlier points that he made, I think, speak to my point that, I do believe that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is the pivot to Asia's point man. But I think China is seeking to explore the nature of the leash he's on, and how tight that leash might be. And I think Abe Shinzo is saying, it is rock solid. I can do whatever I wish, but and I think that's what's actually happening at the moment. Put up a photograph of Abe Shinzo. We estimate at this point in excess of 7,000 foreign fighters have been attracted from some 50 countries, many of them in Europe and the Middle East, said James Clapper, the US Director of National Intelligence. And that goes back to the point that Bashar was making. I like this comment read that I found again by Roger Agnelli, President and Chief Executive of Vale. The thing about Africa is that sooner or later it will become a reality. And I couldn't agree more. On another point, I have a friend called Peter Grest, who's a reporter for Al Jazeera, and I'll put up a photograph of him when he was in my office not too long ago. And he's currently in an Egyptian jail, and is a near perfect example of an innocent caught up in a geopolitical crossfire. That crossfire being Egypt's unhappiness at Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt is now to try Al Jazeera staff on terror-related charges. I can only vouch for Peter and say that this is just so off his reservation. It's absurd. The euro was at 135.48, dollar index back at that level I spoke about, 81.06. It's now pushed through 81.09. Momentum is building. Japanese yen 102.46, and that's going to cap a 2.8% monthly advance, which is the biggest since April 2012. Swiss franc 0.9025, the pound 164.74, Aussie 0.8765 has rebounded 0.9% this week. India rupee 62.425, South Korean won 10.8040, Rial 241.15, Egyptian pound pretty solid, but then they've got $4 billion coming from the Saudis, and more coming out of the GCC. South African rand 11.20, and it remains the worst performing currency in January, declining 6.4% against the dollar. The Turkish lira is down 5.2%, and of course the Argentine peso fell 19% when it got devalued. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and my only comment is it looks this, crossing 8106, if it holds above that level, which it looks as if it might do, it will mean that there is quite a bit more upside. The Bloomberg dollar spot index was little change at 10.3004. It's basically up 1% in January. US economy, as expected, expanded 3.2% in the fourth quarter. The Fed, of course, are trimming another 10 billion. They're down at 65 billion now. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. Dollar yen, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. That's at a strong start to the year. The Nikkei, by contrast, is down 9.1% this year. Topics down 6.8%. Remember, Fiat made its name building millions of modest cars like the tiny 500 and 600 hatchbacks in the 60s and 70s. Sergio Marchionne wants you to forget that Fiat, and is talking about the success they've had in going up the food chain, in particular with the Maserati, Ghibli, and saying that the only car factory in Italy which is in full swing is the Maserati one. Put up a photograph of the Maserati that they are talking about, and also, of course, the most famous figure when it comes to Fiat was Gianni Agnelli, the godfather of style, who ran Fiat during the jet set age and widely thought to be one of the most stylish men of the 20th century. In this article in the Wall Street Journal, his style was about more than clothes. It was an attitude, a philosophical response to absurdity. Watching him could tell you how to live, how to behave. In Italy, they call it sprezzatura, making the difficult look easy. Americans are gonzo, a spirit personified by Hunter S. Thompson, who defined it as a man who learns to fly by falling out of a plane. Agnelli might look gonzo, especially on nights when he showed up in boots and an ill-fitting tie, but was in fact sprezzatura. He knew how to fly all along. When he was not perfectly dressed, it was contrived, says Taki. Taki is one of the few surviving members of Agnelli's social circle. The tie askew, the unbuttoned shirt. Nothing was an accident, or to put it another way, it was meant to be an accident, which made it even more stylish. And then his niece saying, when he came in the house, you felt the atmosphere change. There was excitement when he was around. You knew something was going to happen. Klaus von Bülow, I actually spent a night out with Klaus and his daughter Cosima, told me Agnelli used to call at 3 or 4 in the morning just to say, tell me, Klaus, what's happening in the clubs? Put up a photograph of him. Gold, it slipped a little bit to 1243.965. I said it was overcooked. I'll put up a 1-year chart. Crude oil 97.93. Look, I think it might go above 100, but I think above 100 it's a super sell. Emerging markets, Brazil making its rounds on social media is a mock change to Brazil's real. Salvador Dali's face emblazoned on the currency and renamed the surreal. Put up a 6-month chart of the real. South African all share down 2.26% in 2014. This is a 2014 low. Dollar versus rand, I'll put up a 3-month chart, 11.20, and I think 12 is a shoo-in. You might get a little bit of strength near term, but I think 10.90 is probably tops. Egyptian pound firm 6.96. That's because of the quality of the support coming out of Saudi Arabia and the GCC. Robert Fisk says Egyptian. He's comparing Sisi to Blair. Egyptian people love Sisi. Why else should Cairo be awash with Sisi chocolates, Sisi t-shirts, and Sisi pajamas? Do the British people love Blair? Do they eat Blair chocolates and wear Blair pajamas? The Egyptian stock market has soared 9.24% this year and is at a fresh 44-month high. That's going back to May 2010 and not too far off an all-time high. The Nigerian all-share is negative 1.76% this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange has reached a fresh all-time high and is plus 4.52% this year. The Democratic Republic of Congo is owed an estimated $3.7 billion in unpaid customs duties and fines. by companies operating in its copper-rich Katanga province between 2008 and 2013. The FAO says agriculture is the key to eradicating hunger in Africa. This is Jose Graziano da Silva, has stressed that agriculture is the engine of growth needed to eradicate hunger and boost food production in Africa. Despite individual success stories as a whole, Africa needs to step up its efforts. More than 1 out of every 5 of its citizens is still denied the right to food. Graziano da Silva was quoted as saying, he said Africa could change the situation. The challenge for Africa is to make this economic growth more inclusive by targeting agriculture and rural development, women and young people. 75% of Africans are 25 years old and under, and the population is expected to remain largely rural for the next 35 years, he said. I'm not sure about that, but I do agree with his point about agriculture. Senegal says South African Airways are among the suitors for its airline, and also interestingly saying Air France KLM as well. Rwanda calls Congo a crybaby at the UN. Congo says Rwanda is arrogant. These guys, Congo, just every other day coming and crying like small babies, Gasana told reporters. Rwanda is a small country. Congo is rich. Congo is everything. How come Rwanda is always the scapegoat? And then Gata Mavita Walufuta told the Security Council, we're a sovereign country and we must be respected as such. And this arrogant behavior by Rwanda must stop. Put up a photograph of the Rwandan ambassador to the UN meeting the US Secretary of State John Kerry. Coming here to Kenya, obviously we've had a real slump in the stock market, and it's going to slump for the 5th day, I think. And I said to Reuters that I think events as far away as the Argentine peso, the midnight strike by Turkey, the collapse in the rand, have all imported some weakness into the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Interestingly, the weighted average of interbank lending rose sharply to 11.376%, talking about, so you can see tighter liquidity in the money markets. And as I said, we've had a huge increase in the foreign investor component of the stock exchange. That's been the defining characteristic of the bull market. I think some of these guys have felt that they should be taking profit. However, I did say to Reuters that I think our markets remain attractive, as do other sub-Saharan African markets, and therefore I think it's going to stabilize sooner rather than later. Kenya transferred 1.9 trillion shillings on their mobile phones last year. A new report by the Central Bank of Kenya has shown. And you remember, 630 days ago, I took a photograph of this M-Pesa shop opposite Safaricom, and it's called it the jewel in the crown. Indeed it is. The shilling is weaker at 86.299, but bear in mind, it's performed far better than some of its other peers. The Nairobi All Share is now only up 1.76%, and that might not hang on to a positive run today. The Nairobi All Share rallied 5.795% at the start of the year through Friday last week. Subsequently, it's fallen every single session this week and has fallen 3.811%. The NSE 20 lost its grip on 5,000 and is now up 0.69% in 2014. I think the soft patch is a little bit further to run. The banks came under heavy volume selling pressure yesterday, and of course there were just 10 winners and 36 losers, so you can see how the market is soft. The tea companies, the agricultural sector continues to be a big outperformer, managing to push on through the noise. But the rest of the market has hit a very weak spot now. Once again, thank you for listening. Hope you have a great weekend.